The smell of a recession is specific. It doesn't smell like poverty, not at first. It smells like floor wax and stale, recirculated air in a government waiting room. It was 2009, and I was sitting in a plastic chair that dug into my spine, clutching a degree in computer science that was currently worth less than the paper stock it was printed on. I was 24. I was supposed to be the vocation of the future. Instead, I was number 47 in a queue of 100 desperate men, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights that flickered with the same dying frequency as my bank account. I remember looking at my hands. They were soft, keyboard hands, useless hands. When I finally snapped, it wasn't a roar. It was a quiet resignation. I walked out of that waiting room, drove past the tech parks with their for lease signs, and walked into a welding bay funded by the state. The transition was violent. I traded the silent, sterile hum of servers for the screaming tear of electricity. The first time I struck an arc, the light blinded me, even through the shade 10 glass of my helmet. The smell of ozone, sharp, metallic, like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle, filled my nose. It was dangerous. It was visceral. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt that I existed. And that's where I met him. We called him RB, Rat Boss. But back then he was just Rob. And he was a goddamn legend. He wasn't the guy in the office with clean fingernails. He was the guy in the trench with soot in his pores and a cigarette permanently glued to his lower lip. He hired me 3 days after I got my certification. He looked at my soft tech boy hands, then at my welds. "Ugly," he said, pointing a calloused finger at my bead. "Looks like a pigeon shat on a girder." He paused, taking a drag of his cigarette, the cherry glowing bright orange in the dim workshop. "You got strong." "I got bills," I said. Rob grinned. It was a wide, wolfish grin that made you want to seek his approval immediately. "Good answer. Get in the truck." That was the beginning. The sleigh ride, as I call it now. For the next 6 years, time didn't move in hours or minutes. It moved in miles and welds. We were a field crew, a half-dozen men crammed into a beat-up transit van, crossing borders like modern-day nomads. Germany, France, Italy. We slept in motels that smelled of damp carpet and bleach. We ate gas station sandwiches that tasted like cardboard. But God, we were alive. There is a specific memory from year 3 that I replay in my head whenever I need to remind myself why I let him get away with it for so long. It was February. We were stuck on a mountain pass somewhere in the Austrian Alps. The job had gone sideways. The client, a mid-level industrial firm, was refusing to release the funds for the final week until we fixed a defect that didn't exist. It was a shakedown. It was 10 below zero outside. The wind was howling, shaking the chassis of our van. The heater had died an hour ago. We were huddled in the back, 4 of us, wrapped in our heavy work jackets, breath pluming in the air like dragon smoke. Morale wasn't just low, it was subterranean.
"We aren't getting paid, are we?" Jenkins, the youngest of us, muttered. He was shivering, his teeth audibly clicking. "My rent is due on Tuesday, Rob. My landlord is going to evict me." The silence that followed was heavy. We all knew the margins Rob ran on. If the client didn't pay, Rob didn't have the cash flow to cover us. That's just how field welding worked. You eat what you kill. Rob was in the driver's seat, staring out at the white void of the blizzard. He hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. I watched him in the rearview mirror. His eyes were hard, calculating. Suddenly, he unbuckled his seatbelt and turned around. He reached into his jacket pocket, the inside breast pocket where he kept the emergency ledger, and pulled out a thick wad of cash, his personal cash, the money he was saving for his own family back home. He started peeling off bills, euro notes, crisp and colorful against the gray gloom of the van. "Here," he said, shoving a fistful of cash at Jenkins. Then another stack for me, another for Marco. "Rob, you can't," I said, my voice hoarse. "That's your stash. If the client doesn't wire the money—" "Screw the client," Rob snapped. He wasn't looking at the money. He was looking at us. "The client is a suit. He's paper. You boys, you're iron." He shoved the money into my hand. His grip was firm, warm despite the cold. "I take care of my own," he said, his voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. "You work for me, you don't starve, you don't freeze. If I have to go into debt to keep the lights on in your house, I'd do it, because that's what a foreman does. That's what a brother does." I looked down at the money in my hand. It was enough to cover my rent for 2 months. I looked back at Rob. In that moment, amidst the smell of unwashed bodies and diesel fumes, I didn't see a boss. I saw a savior. I would have walked into a burning building for that man. "Thanks, boss," I whispered. "Don't thank me," he grunted, turning back to the windshield. "Just weld straight tomorrow." That was the trap, that moment right there. It was the moment I stopped checking the math. Because you don't audit a saint. You don't ask to see the receipts of the man who fed you when you were starving. Normalcy settled in like a warm blanket. Years 4, 5, and 6 blurred together. I moved up the ranks. Rob promoted me to foreman as he started stepping back, spending more time in the capital city, handling the big picture. We still talked every day, but the conversations shifted. Less about weld porosity and tensile strength, more about his project. The dream house. It became his obsession. By year 7, Rob wasn't welding anymore. He was building. He'd bought a plot of land just outside the city limits, a massive, sprawling thing. One afternoon, during a downtime between jobs, I was at his temporary office on a porta-cabin on the edge of a site in Belgium. The air conditioner was rattling, fighting a losing battle against the humidity.
Rob was hunched over a drafting table, his eyes bright, almost feverish. "Look at this," he said, waving me over. He smelled of strong coffee and expensive cologne, a new addition. I walked over. The blueprints were spread out like a battle map. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, a terrace that looked bigger than my entire apartment. "This here," Rob said, tapping a section on the second floor with a manicured fingernail. "This is the playroom, for the kids. Soundproofed walls, imported oak flooring. I'm getting a custom mural painted on the ceiling." "It's incredible, Rob," I said, genuinely impressed. "But imported oak, that's gotta be costing a fortune." "It's an investment," he said quickly. Too quickly. "It's for the legacy. You build it once, you build it right, just like a weld, right?" "Right," I nodded. The phone on his desk buzzed. It vibrated aggressively against the wood. Rob glanced at the screen, and his face changed. It was a micro-expression, there and gone in a heartbeat. The warm, proud father vanished. In his place was something cornered. His jaw tightened, the muscles bunching near his ear. His eyes narrowed into slits. He snatched the phone up. "Yeah?" He turned back to me, walking toward the dirty window. I tried not to listen, picking at a loose thread on my work vest, but the room was small and the silence behind his voice was loud. "I told you not to check that account," Rob hissed. His voice was low, venomous. "I moved it. It's handled. No, don't listen to me. Stop spending. You're bleeding me dry. I said I handled it." He stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, his shoulders hunched up to his ears. Then he hung up. The silence in the porta-cab stretched. The air conditioner rattled. Thump, rattle. Thump, rattle. I cleared my throat, feeling like I had walked in on someone naked. "Everything okay, boss?" Rob turned around, and then the mask slid back into place. He smiled, but it wasn't the wolfish grin from the van in the Alps. It was tighter. The skin around his eyes didn't crinkle. It looked like a ceramic plate that had been glued back together. "Wives," he let out a short, hollow laugh. "She sees a number in the bank and thinks it's shopping day, doesn't understand cash flow, doesn't understand the liquidity required for this business." He walked back to the desk, tapping the blueprint again, but his hand was shaking. Just a tremor. "You gotta keep a little separate stash, kid," he said, looking at me, but his eyes were focusing on something 1,000 yards away. "Creative accounting. Keep a little something in the dark where nobody can touch it. Not the wife, not the government. It's the only way to survive." I laughed. It was an awkward, polite laugh. "I'll keep that in mind." "You do that," he murmured. He rolled up the blueprints, snapping a rubber band around them with a violence that made me flinch.
"Loyalty is iron, right? But cash? Cash is the oxygen. Can't breathe without oxygen." I drove home that night feeling a strange knot in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing. Rob was just stressed. He was building a mansion. He was the guy who gave me cash in a blizzard. He was the brother I never had. I didn't know it then, but the knot in my stomach wasn't indigestion. It was instinct. It was the quiet subconscious realization that the separate stash he was talking about wasn't his profit margin. It was my money. The silence of the pandemic was loud, but the noise that came after was worse. When the world finally reopened, the iron bond we had forged in the snow of the Alps was gone. The old crew, Jenkins, Marco, the guys who would have shared a single can of beans without complaint, had vanished. They had families, mortgages, a newfound fear of being stranded across a closed border. They took local jobs, safe jobs. So when Rob called me back to the field, I wasn't leading a band of brothers. I was herding cats. Sick, feral cats. We were on a site in Dusseldorf. The air inside the fabrication hall was thick with the taste of metallic dust and old sweat. It was a humid Tuesday, the kind where your shirt sticks to your back the moment you step out of the shower. I stood on the catwalk, looking down at the new crew. Rob called them temp hires. I called them the sewer crew. There was Miller, a guy whose hands shook so violently until his first lunch break beer that his welds looked like seismograph readings during an earthquake. And then there was Kovich, a man I had caught twice trying to pawn the copper wiring from our welding leads. I watched Miller down below. He was weaving. Not the rhythmic weave of a welder laying a bead, but the physical sway of a man trying to find his center of gravity. He struck an arc, and sparks showered down onto a pile of oily rags he hadn't bothered to move. "Hey!" I bellowed, slamming my hand on the railing. The metal rang out, a dull, hollow thong. "Miller, kill the torch!" He looked up, lifting his helmet. His eyes were red-rimmed, glassy. He gave me a slow, confused blink. He's high, I thought. The realization hit me with a wave of exhaustion so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. I am building high-pressure steam pipes with a junkie. I scrambled down the ladder, my boots clanging against the rungs. I snatched the torch from his hand. It was hot, the ceramic nozzle radiating heat through my glove. "Get out," I hissed. "Come on, foreman, just a little dizzy, fumes, you know?" I said get out. Go to the van, sleep it off. If I see you on this floor again today, I'm calling the cops, myself. As he shambled away, kicking a wrench across the concrete, I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was Rob.
"How's progress?" he asked. No hello, no how are you, just the demand. "Slow," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead with a soot-stained sleeve. "Miller is useless. I had to pull him off the line. We need real welders, Rob. These guys, they're gonna get someone killed." "Relax." Rob's voice crackled over the line. He sounded distant, distracted. I heard the clinking of china in the background. A restaurant? "Just write him hard. I need that invoice signed by Friday. I've got liquidity issues. The roofers are demanding a deposit on the house." The house. Always the house. Rob, Miller was high. High on a job site. "Did you fire him?" "I sent him to the van. If I fire him, we miss the deadline." "There you go," Rob said, his voice smoothing out, becoming that soothing baritone I used to trust. "You're a problem solver. That's why you're the foreman. Just get it done, buddy. For me." He hung up before I could argue. I stared at the phone. Buddy. The word tasted like ash. The breaking point didn't happen on the job site. It happened at 3:14 a.m. on a Thursday. My phone screamed into the darkness of the hotel room. It wasn't a ringing, it was an alarm. I jolted awake, heart hammering against my ribs, fumbling for the device on the nightstand. The screen was a blinding white rectangle in the pitch black. Unknown number. "Hello?" My voice was a croak. "Is this the supervisor for Metalworks?" "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Sergeant Weber, Düsseldorf Police. We have a Mr. Kovic in custody. Drunken disorderly. He has halted a bartender. He has no identification, only a work pass with your number." My stomach dropped. It felt like I was in an elevator that had just snapped its cable. "I'm coming," I said. The drive to the station was a blur of wet asphalt and angry streetlights. The silence in the car was suffocating. My mind was racing, running simulations of the conversation I was about to have with the client. They're going to cancel the contract, we're done. The police station smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale vomit, a sharp, acidic tang that coated the back of my throat. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency. I sat on a wooden bench, waiting for the paperwork. I felt small. I felt dirty. I was an educated man, a skilled technician, and here I was, babysitting a grown man who couldn't handle his liquor. I pulled out my phone and dialed Rob. I needed him to handle this. I needed the boss. He picked up on the fourth ring, groggily.
"Rob, Kovic is in jail," I whispered, shielding the phone from the glare of the desk sergeant. "He punched a bartender. The police called the client to verify his employment. The client knows Rob." I waited for the explosion. I waited for him to scream about Kovic. "Christ," Rob sighed, a heavy, annoyed exhale. "Why weren't you watching him?" I froze. The question hung in the air, absurd and sharp. "Watching him?" I hissed. "It's 3 a.m, Rob. I was sleeping. I'm his foreman, not his father." "You're the lead man," Rob said, his voice hardening. "It's your job to keep the crew in line. Now I have to smooth this over with the client. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me? I'm trying to secure a loan for the driveway, and now I have to deal with this." "The driveway?" "He assaulted someone, Rob, and you're worried about your driveway?" "I'm worried about my reputation," he snapped. "Just bail him out. Keep it quiet. I'll deal with the money later." Click. I stared at the phone. The buzzing of the lights seemed to get louder, drilling into my temples. Why weren't you watching him? He hadn't asked if I was okay. He hadn't asked if the contract was safe. He had blamed me. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel like his brother. I felt like his insurance policy. 2 weeks later, I was back home. The job was done. The bill was signed. I was sitting at my kitchen table. It was late, maybe midnight. A single lamp cast a yellow pool of light over a sea of receipts and crumpled invoices. My ankle was throbbing, a dull ache from standing on concrete for 12 hours a day, but I ignored it. I was trying to reconcile the travel expenses. Rob owed me. He owed me big, a year's worth of mileage, at least 2,000 miles a month at the standard government rate. It was a chunk of change, enough to finally fix the leaking roof on my own modest house. I had the master spreadsheet open on my laptop. I had the client's reimbursement logs on one side and the payments Rob had wired to the crew on the other. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the blur. Something's wrong. I punched the numbers into the calculator again. Client payment for travel, 4,500 euros. Total payout to crew, 3,800 euros. 700 euros. Missing. I frowned. Maybe it was an administrative fee. No, the contract said 100% pass-through. Maybe a bank transfer error? I dug deeper. I went back to the previous month. Client payment, 4,200 euros.
Total payout, 3,500 euros. Another 700. My heart started to beat faster, a strange, erratic rhythm. It wasn't the panic of the police station. It was the cold dread of a mathematician finding a flaw in the equation. I pulled up the logs from 6 months ago. The discrepancy was there too, smaller, but there. He's skimming, a voice in my head whispered. No, I argued back immediately. No, Rob wouldn't do that. He took a loan to pay us in the Alps. He's just bad at math. He's stressed about the house. It's a mistake, a rounding error. But the cursor blinked at me, mockingly, a consistent, methodical rounding error that always landed in Rob's pocket. I closed the laptop. I felt sick. Not the nausea of illness, but the nausea of doubt. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. Because if I was right, then the last 7 years, the brotherhood, the loyalty, the iron, was just rust painted over with silver spray paint. I confronted him 3 days later. It was September. The heat wave was breaking, but the air was still heavy and humid. We met at a roadside diner halfway between my place and his construction site. Rob looked tired. He had bags under his eyes, but he was wearing a new watch, a heavy chrome thing that probably cost more than my car. We made small talk for 10 minutes. The coffee tasted like burnt rubber. I watched him stir 3 packets of sugar into his cup, the spoon clinking rhythmically against the ceramic. Clink, clink, clink. Rob, I started, keeping my voice level, we need to settle up the travel expenses. It's been a year. I've got contractors lined up for my roof. I need that cash. Rob didn't look up. He kept stirring. I know. It's coming. You said that last month and the month before. He finally looked at me. His eyes were flat. It's the wife, he said, lowering his voice as if she were hiding under the table. She's got the accounts on lockdown. She sees every transaction. If I wire you $5,000 right now, she's going to flip. She thinks I'm spending it on materials. That's not my problem, Rob. That's my money. I earned it. I drove those miles. I know. He held up his hands, palms out, a gesture of surrender. And you're going to get it. I just need time. Just a few more weeks. Once the bank releases the next tranche of the construction loan, I can shuffle some things around, pay you out of the materials budget. Shuffle things around? I repeated. Like the client reimbursements? He froze. Just for a second. His spoon stopped mid-stir. What does that mean? I saw the logs, Rob. The numbers don't match. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. A fly buzzed against the window pane, desperate to get out.
Then, Rob leaned back, and he smiled. It wasn't the brotherly smile. It wasn't even the tired boss smile. It was a terrifyingly empty expression. His lips curled up, showing teeth, but his eyes were dead. They were calculating, assessing me not as a friend, but as a liability, a loose bolt that needed tightening. "You're tired," he said softly. "You're reading in the things. Paperwork gets messy, you know that. He reached across the table and patted my hand. His skin was dry, papery. I've got you. Half the money by the end of the month. I promise. I've got a big meeting abroad next week, getting my foot back in the door with the big clients. Once that's signed, we're golden. End of the month, I said, pulling my hand away. End of the month. He agreed. He stood up, threw a 20-euro note on the table, and walked out. I watched him go. I watched him get into his truck and drive away. And as the dust settled, I realized I was shivering. In the middle of a warm September afternoon, a cold chill had settled into my marrow. He was lying. He wasn't going abroad for a client. He was running out the clock. I looked down at the coffee he hadn't finished. The sugar had settled at the bottom, a sludge of undissolved sweetness. He's going to screw me, I thought. The realization wasn't a question anymore. It was a fact. I grabbed my phone to text him, to demand a written agreement, to do something. But as I stood up, my foot caught on the leg of the table. I stumbled. It was a clumsy, stupid movement, born of distraction and rage. I tried to catch myself, but my boot slid on the greasy diner tiles. My ankle turned. I heard it before I felt it. A wet, sickening snap, like a dry branch breaking under a heavy boot. I hit the floor and the world dissolved into white, blinding pain. The floor of the diner smelled of pine sol and old fryer grease. That was the first thing I registered. Not the pain. The pain hadn't arrived yet. It was still traveling up the nerve endings, stuck in traffic. But the smell and the cold, sticky tile against my cheek. Then the sound rushed in. A waitress dropped the tray. The crash of ceramic shattering sounded like a bomb going off. A woman screamed, "Oh God, look at his foot!" I didn't want to look, but I did. My right foot was facing the wrong way. It was twisted outward at a sickening, impossible 90-degree angle, dangling like a puppet with cut strings. The denim of my jeans was tight around the swelling that was already ballooning the flesh. Then the pain hit. It wasn't a sharp stab. It was a roar. It felt like someone had poured molten lead into the marrow of my tibia. My vision narrowed to a pinprick of white light. I gasped, sucking in air that tasted of dust, my fingers scrabbling against the grout of the floor tiles.
"Don't move, honey, don't move." The waitress was hovering over me, her face pale. I grabbed her wrists. My grip was iron hard, fueled by adrenaline. My phone, I wheezed. "Where is my phone?" "You need an ambulance, sir, not a phone." "My phone!" I snarled, the panic overriding the agony. Because as I lay there, my ankle destroyed, my career as a field welder effectively over for the next 6 months, I wasn't thinking about surgery. I wasn't thinking about rehabilitation. I was thinking about the first of the month. The deal, my brain screamed through the haze of pain. We had a deal. Half the money. If I'm in the hospital, if I can't work, he has to pay me. He has to. The darkness crowded in at the edges of my vision, pulling me down into unconsciousness. The last thing I saw was the waitress's terrified face, and the last thing I thought was, "Rob, you better not be lying." The hospital room was a white box designed to amplify silence. I had been there for 6 days. My leg was encased in a heavy plaster cast, elevated on a sling. 3 metal pins were holding my ankle bones together. The surgeon, a brisk man who smelled of spearmint gum and arrogance, told me it was a complex fracture with ligament detachment. "You won't be climbing scaffolds anytime soon," he had said, checking his watch. 6 months minimum, maybe a year for full load bearing. 6 months. I lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling tiles. I'd counted them. 142. There was a water stain on tile number 36 that looked like a grimacing face. The silence was heavy, physical. It pressed against my eardrums. The only sounds were the rhythmic beep hiss of the IV pump and the distant squeak of nurse shoes in the hallway. In the silence of my phone. It sat on the bedside table, a black monolith of plastic and glass. Every time the screen lit up with a notification, my heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, erratic thudding that the monitors picked up. Email? Spam. Facebook? Happy birthday from an aunt I haven't seen in a decade. News alert. Rain expected.
Nothing from Rob. I had texted him on day 1. Bad accident. Hospitalized. Need to talk. Day 2. Surgery went well. When are you back? Day 4. Rob. He's busy, I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded raspy, foreign. He's abroad. The signal was bad. He's trying to land that big client. He's doing this for us.
I was bargaining with reality. I was building a mental fortress to protect the image of the man who'd bought me soup when I had the flu in Munich, the man who'd paid my rent in the Alps. But the fortress was crumbling. I remembered the fake smile on the diner, the dead eyes. He knows, a cold voice in my head whispered. He knows you can't work. You're no use to him now. You're just a liability. No, I said aloud, squeezing my eyes shut. We're brothers. Loyalty is iron. But iron rusts. And sitting in that antiseptic-smelling room, trapped in a body that wouldn't obey me, I could feel the corrosion spreading. On the 10th day, my mother came. She walked in carrying a Tupperware container of homemade stew and an envelope that looked ominously formal. She looked tired. Her gray hair was pulled back in a fraying bun, and there were new lines etched around her mouth. She sat in the vinyl chair next to the bed, setting the stew on the tray table. The smell of beef and carrots wafted up, momentarily masking the hospital smell of bleach and sickness. "How is it?" she asked, nodding at the leg. "Throbbing?" I said, "But the swelling's down," the doctor says. She nodded. Clasping her hands in her lap, she was wringing her fingers, a nervous tic she'd had since Dad died. I had to make a decision," she said, not meeting my eyes. My stomach tightened. "What decision?" "The contractors for the roof. They showed up on Tuesday. They said if we didn't pay the deposit and the materials cost up front, they were walking. Said they had another job lined up."
The hold music for the Department of Labor and Social Protection was a tinny, distorted version of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. It played on a loop, interrupted every 30 seconds by a robotic voice thanking me for my patience. I'd been on hold for 45 minutes. My leg was throbbing in time with my heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. The pain medication was wearing off, leaving the edges of my consciousness raw and exposed. Finally, the music stopped. A click. "Department of Claims, Agent 412 speaking, how can I help you?" The voice was bored, flat. A woman who had answered 1,000 calls like this today and just wanted to go home. "Yes, hello," I stammered, my throat dry. "I'm calling about a sick leave claim, reference number..." I fumbled with the papers on my lap, my hands shaking. "Reference 88 Bravo Charlie 9? One moment." The sound of typing, clack, clack, clack. It sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. "Name? My name? Employer? RB Welding Solutions?" More typing. The silence stretched. I could hear the woman breathing on the other end. I stared at the window. It was raining outside. Rain that would have been leaking into my attic if my mother hadn't drained my bank account. "Okay, I see the file," the agent said. "Approved on the 10th. Status is paid out." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Paid? You mean it's processing?" "No, sir. Disbursed. The funds were released on the 14th of this month, full amount for the first installment plus the travel reimbursement adjustment for the medical transfer." The 14th. That was 3 weeks ago. "Released to whom?" I asked. The words felt heavy like stones in my mouth. "To the registered employer account ending in 409? That was Rob's business account, the main vein." "Are you sure?" I asked. My voice was high, thin. A high-pitched ringing had started in my ears, a whine like a broken capacitor. "Sir?" "No," I whispered. "No, I didn't receive it." "Well, you'll need to take that up with your payroll department. The government has fulfilled its obligation." Click. She hung up. I lowered the phone slowly. My hand was trembling so violently that I dropped it. It clattered onto the plastic tray table.
He had it. He had the money. He had my money. Not just the debt he owed me from the travel. He had the sick pay. The money meant to keep me from starving while I lay in this bed with metal screws in my bones. He had received the notification 3 weeks ago. He had seen the deposit hit his account. A massive injection of cash. And what had he done? I closed my eyes and I saw the blueprints, I saw the imported oak flooring, I saw the soundproofed playroom, I saw the 3-car garage. He didn't see a sick friend, he didn't see a brother. He saw a pile of bricks, he saw a bag of cement, he saw a way to pay the roofers for his dream house. He had stolen my survival to build his luxury. The betrayal hit me harder than the fall in the diner. It was physical. A wave of nausea rolled over me, hot and acidic. I leaned over the side of the bed and dry heaved into the plastic trash can, my body convulsing with the shock of it. When I finally pulled back, wiping my mouth at the back of my hand, the tears came. Not tears of sadness, tears of rage. I looked at the phone again. It was silent, mocking. I picked it up. I opened my contacts. I scrolled down to Rob Boss. I didn't call him. I stared at the number, the digits that used to mean safety, the digits that used to mean rescue. Now they looked like coordinates. Target coordinates. The ringing in my ears stopped, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. The pain in my legs seemed to recede, pushed back by a new, burning purpose. Loyalty is iron, I whispered to the empty white room. My thumb hovered over the delete button. But rust eats iron. I pressed delete. My house smelled of sickness. It's a distinct scent, a cloying mixture of rubbing alcohol, stale sweat, and dust. The dust was everywhere. It coated the television stand, the bookshelves, the silent laptop. I lay in the center of it, a prisoner in a nest of pillows and tangled sheets, my cast propped on a foam wedge that was starting to yellow with age.
The oxycodone sat on the nightstand, an amber bottle half full. It didn't stop the pain, not really. It just pushed it into the next room, turning the screaming agony in my ankle into a dull, throbbing bass line. Thump, thump, thump. I stared at the filing cabinet across the room. It was an ugly thing, beige metal, dented on the side from when I moved in. It was maybe 10 feet away. It might as well have been on the moon. "Get up," I whispered. My voice was raspy, unused. I gripped the edge of the mattress. My knuckles turned white. I swung my good leg over the side, feeling the carpet, cool, gritty, against my soul. Then came the bad leg, heavy, dead weight. The plaster cast scraped against the sheets, a sound like dry sandpaper. Grrrsh. I reached for the crutches, leaning against the wall. My shoulder muscles screamed as I hoisted myself up. The blood rushed down to my ankle, and for a second, the world tilted gray. I gritted my teeth, breathing through my nose. In, out, in, out. The journey to the filing cabinet took 3 minutes. When I reached it, I was sweating, cold, clammy sweat that pricked at my hairline. I slumped against the wall, balancing on one leg, and yanked the drawer open. The metal track squealed. Inside, it was a chaotic jumble of paper, but I knew where it was, the foreman folder. The folder Rom had told me to keep just in case the taxman comes sniffing around and we need to verify dates. I pulled it out. It was heavy, thick, with 7 years of secrets. I dragged it back to the bed, dumping the contents onto the mattress. Receipts, timesheets, invoices, bank transfer logs. I took an oxy pill, dry swallowing it. Then I grabbed a highlighter. I didn't feel anger. Anger is hot. Anger makes your hands shake. What I felt was something else entirely. It was cold. It was surgical. I felt like a coroner preparing to make the first incision. I opened the first document. It was a travel log from 2018. Entry, 4,000 kilometers billed to client X. Entry, 2,500 kilometers paid to crew. I highlighted the difference in neon yellow. Theft, I thought. Strike one. I moved to the next. A safety equipment invoice. Rob had billed the client for high-grade respirators. I remembered that job. We had used disposable paper masks. Fraud. Strike two. Then the emails, the ones where he instructed me to adjust the hours for the temp workers to keep them under the threshold for mandatory benefits. Labor violation. Strike three. I worked for 6 hours. The sun moved across the room, casting long, stretching shadows over the bedspread. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just highlighted. By the time I was done, the black binder wasn't just a pile of papers. It was a weapon. It was a paper trail that led directly from the sweat of my crew to the imported oak floors of his dream house. I closed the binder. The snap of the rings closing sounded like a gunshot. The office of the labor inspectorate was painted a color that could only be described as bureaucracy gray. The air conditioner was broken. A box fan in the corner rattled rhythmically, blowing warm air around the room that smelled of burnt coffee and photocopier toner. I sat in a chair that was too low for my leg. The cast extended awkwardly into the aisle. Across the desk sat Mrs. Holloway. She was a woman in her 50s, with glasses on a chain and an expression of permanent exhaustion. She looked at the binder I had placed on her desk. She didn't open it.
Sir, I understand you're upset about your sick pay, but as I said on the phone, if the employer claims he transferred it, it's not just the sick pay, I interrupted. My voice was calm, scary calm. The painkillers had smoothed out all the edges. We have a backlog of 3 months, she said, tapping a stack of files next to her elbow. If this is a minor wage dispute, I suggest small claims court. Open it, I said. She hesitated. Then with a dramatic sigh of resignation, she flipped the cover of the binder. She looked at the first page, the summary I had typed up. Subject: Systemic embezzlement of government funds and labor rights violations. Employer, RB Welding Solutions. She turned the page. She saw the highlighted travel logs. She saw the side-by-side comparison of the bank transfers. She turned another page. Then another. The sighing stopped. She sat up straighter. She reached for her glasses, sliding them up her nose. The boredom in her eyes evaporated, replaced with a sharp, predatory focus. She stopped drinking her coffee. This email, she said, pointing a printed manicured finger at 2019, where he tells you to lose the accident report for the worker who burned his hand, is this authentic? It is. I have the original server logs on a USB drive in the front pocket. She turned more pages, faster now. The rattling of the box fan seemed to fade away. The only sound was the swish slap of paper. And this? She asked, her voice dropping. He claimed tax credits for a training program that never happened? He used the money to pour the foundation for his garage.
Mrs. Holloway closed the binder. She didn't push it back to me. She placed both hands on top of it, as if securing evidence at a crime scene. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. There was no pity in her eyes anymore. There was respect, and a little bit of fear. Sir, she said quietly, do you realize the scope of what you're showing me? This isn't a fine. This isn't a slap on the wrist. She tapped the black cover of the binder. This is a demolition. If this checks out, he won't just lose his business license. He's going to lose everything. The assets, the accounts, the personal property seized to pay the debts. I know, I said. He has a family? She asked. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a clarification of collateral damage. He does, I said. I thought of the blueprints, the playroom. Proceed. The meteor didn't hit all at once. It entered the atmosphere silently. I went home. I waited. 2 weeks passed. The silence in my house was different now. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of a held breath. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It wasn't a text. It wasn't an email. It was a call. Rob. Boss. I stared at the screen. The vibration buzzed against the wood of the nightstand, an angry insect trying to escape. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I picked it up. I didn't say hello. I just pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear. What did you do? Rob's voice was unrecognizable. It was high, ragged. He was hyperventilating. What did you do? He screamed, the sound distorting the speaker. They're here. The accounts are frozen. My cards. I tried to buy gas and the card declined. I called the bank and they said there's a federal lien. I laid back against the pillows, looking at the water stain on the ceiling. Hello, Rob, I said. Don't you hello me, he shrieked. The inspector. She's at the office right now. She's seizing the computer. She said you gave them everything, the books, the emails. I gave them the truth. We were brothers, Rob yelled. I could hear the tears in his voice now, the panic. 7 years. I took you in. I taught you. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to my family? Your family? I asked. You mean the house? My wife is crying in the kitchen. The kids, they're going to take the house, you son of a bitch. They're going to take the house to pay the fines. You took my house first.
What? He sounded confused. What are you talking about? My roof, I said softly. My savings, my sick pay. You took the money that was supposed to keep a roof over my head and you put it into your floorboards. You made me destitute, Rob. You left me to rot. I was going to pay you back, he sobbed. The fight was leaving him. He was crumbling. I swear to God I was going to pay you. I just needed a little more time. Please, please call them. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I'm good for it. I can't lose the house. It's my dream. It was never your house, I said. It was built with stolen bricks. Please, he wailed. It was a pathetic sound. A man who had once been a giant reduced to a beggar. I'll do anything. I'll sign over the truck. I don't want the truck, I said. Then what do you want? He cried. What do you want from me? I looked at my cast.
at the leg that would never be quite the same. I want you to know how it feels, I said. How what feels? To fall, I said. I hung up. I didn't block the number this time. I turned the phone off completely. I set it on the nightstand. The room was silent again, but the dust didn't feel so heavy anymore. Outside, the rain had stopped. 2 years later,
I felt nothing. No joy, no gloating. Just a hollow, quiet sense of balance. I looked away, staring down the street where the leaves were swirling in the gutter. My mind drifted across the city, to the cramped Soviet-era apartment block in the capital, the sardine can. I imagined him there. I could almost smell it. The scent of cabbage boiling in a kitchen with no ventilation, the damp mold in the bathroom corners. I pictured Rob sitting at a tiny, chipped formica table, the walls pressing in on him. His wife shouting in the other room, the kids crying because there was no space to play. He was trapped. He had traded a mansion for a prison cell made of his own greed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was cold against my thumb. I opened the bankruptcy proceedings file one last time. The final payout had come through last week. After the fines, the lawyers, the severance for the other employees, and the bank seizures, there was almost nothing left. I got 1 month's worth of sick pay. That was it. I looked at my cane. I looked at the scar that ran up my calf, hidden beneath my jeans. I had traded my ability to run for a few thousand euros. A bad trade, by any metric. But then I looked back at the house. Rob had lost the land. He had lost the business. He was barred from holding a director's license for 10 years. He was destitute. An eye for an eye, I thought, watching the stranger close the door to the beautiful house. No. That's amateur math. He took my eye, so I took his head. I opened my contact list. I scrolled down to the bottom. Rob, boss. It was still there, a digital ghost. I pressed edit. I scrolled down to the bottom of the screen. The red text glared at me. Delete contact. I didn't hesitate. I didn't shake. My hand was steady, the iron in my blood finally cool. I tapped the screen. The name vanished. The number dissolved into the ether, joining the millions of other deleted things in the digital graveyard. I put the phone back in my pocket. The weight was gone. Goodbye, Rob. I whispered to the wind. I turned around. Tap. Step. Drag.